Oh, I guess so. The button thingy got pushed. All right, so we're at Parsha Tetze. Parsha Tetze. We'll learn in a minute. Parsha or Tetze means when you go in. And this Torah portion starts with the words when you go into war. And ki, aside from when, also means surely. So this is a certainty. It's going to happen. Tetzai comes from the root yatsa, that means to go in and to go out. So it's certain that we go in and we come out. We have to interact with the world. But milchama means war, but it comes from a root lachem that means to eat. It means food, nourishment. So there's something also to keep in mind in this Torah portion, that assuredly, without a doubt, we're going to take things in, we're going to put things out, because we're constantly eating. And we don't have to eat food, but we're constantly eating something. We read, we listen to people, we hear conversations, we watch television. Our senses are constantly being fed. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let's open up with prayer, and then we'll take a look at this Torah portion. Master Yahuwah, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts, so that we see, hear, and understand what your word tells us. And we thank you for it in the name of Yahusha. Amen. So, this Torah portion, Tetze, has got a lot of sidras in it. It's got 74 of the mitzvot in the Torah are contained in this Torah portion. And for us to try to go through the entire Torah portion would take forever. But what we're going to consider tonight is a common theme throughout this Torah portion. It's what you take in will affect your life. So the word mitzvot, this word we throw around a lot, it's a word that we kind of need to understand. We say mitzvot, okay, well it means a commandment. But the word mitzvot also means a direction. And if we say that the Torah is an instruction book, then the mitzvot are the directions found in that instruction book. So this sidra will illustrate the consequences of not following Yahuwah Elohim's directions. Like we said, Tetze means when you go. And the sidra that we're going to consider says when you go to battle. So we have to understand that there's always some kind of battle, whether it's spiritual, psychological, physical. Something's always being waged. Some kind of battle is always being waged in our lives. Now, this study is going to give us a different point of view as to what it is to disobey Elohim's command to destroy the inhabitants of Canaan instead of bring one home. The commandment in the Torah was when you go in to inhabit these lands, destroy everyone. Don't leave anyone alive. But here in this, what we call the ceremonial part of the law that Moses wrote and gave out, it says, when you go forth to battle against your enemies, and Yahuwah Elohecha delivers them into your hands, and you carry them away captive. So, right away, Elohim gave a commandment. Don't allow them to live. But here's a commandment that's telling us, or a statute that's telling us, this is what you do when you capture them. So, this is Devarim 21, 10 through 14 is what we're going to consider. It was pretty neat. I had all these sidras lined out, and we were going to go through all these sidras, and we're going to correlate them all, and we got to 5 pages on the first one, and I said, well, maybe we'll just do one of these every year until we run out of sidras. So again, when you go forth to battle against your enemies, and Yahuwah Elohecha delivers them into your hands, and you carry them away captive. So immediately, Yahuwah Elohecha. This is talking to us individually. And that's something we need to pay attention to individually. So this verse immediately illustrates to us how well Yahuwah, our Elohim, knows and understands the stubbornness of our hearts. He said, when you go in, don't leave anything alive. But now he's saying, when you have captives. So this verse uses the title Elohecha. So we have to consider that what's being affected here is our personal relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. Now we've learned in the previous books of the Torah that the children of Israel were not to take captives. They were not to spare anyone alive. In fact, it said, just leave the fruit trees. Kill everything else. We have to understand that we're always in a battle. There are countless videos, articles online, hundreds of books that we read concerning every topic that the Bible tells us as a whole what it'll include. There's also countless of other things that affect us that don't include the Bible. We have just books on information, the newspapers that are telling us about the media. You know, Bobby Sue down at Billy Joe's gas station said this, and you know, it comes back through the grapevine to us that Bobby Joe said this, and we get a whole lot of stimulus, okay? So, something to understand. Does Yahuwah, our Elohim, our mighty judge that has the authority to redeem, deliver, and restore us, really deliver these things into our hands so that we carry them away captive? That's the first question. Does he deliver these things? Does Elohim deliver into our hands false information? Well, he doesn't deliver it. Let's find out what this word actually means. Let's consider the word used for deliver in this verse is unetano, that from the root natan actually means to permit or to allow, as well as to entrust. So let's consider that Elohim knows that we are all stubborn. First of all, we're going to pick up materials that or go to websites that are going to give us a plethora of information, some good and not so good. Yahuwah, our Elohim, permits it and allows it. He doesn't deliver it to us, as he has already given us what we should focus on. Now there's something. He's given us what we should focus on. We're the ones that bring in all the extra stuff. Sometimes we feel that we need to bring in the extra stuff. But he's already given us what we should focus on. Yahuwah Elohim will not interfere with our free will to choose. So considering this, we also have to consider that in what he permits and allows, he also trusts us to Shema and Shamar, to perceive, discern, and understand what we read or what we hear, and that as to what we carry away captive. So we have to perceive, discern, and understand what we hear, and then Shamar, that what we carry away captive, we're willing to guard and protect ourselves against it. So he trusts us to understand what we're taking in, and then he trusts us to protect ourselves from the influence of it. He gives us mitpalel. Mitpalel, we said, is that thing within us that allows us to judge, to discern, perceive, discern, understand. But it also allows us to communicate with Elohim. And we found that mitpalel was buried within the word Adam when we tore the word Adam down. So he also trusts us to Shema and Shamar. Now, we can apply this line of thinking to gossip as well. Elohim permits it and allows it, not because it's right, but because we're all prone to do it. He trusts us not to get sucked into Lashon Hara, and expects us to maintain Shmiras Halashon, not only a guarded tongue, but a guarded mind. So none of us are perfect. we are going to become infatuated with some things that we have been previously warned not to allow to live among us. We are human containers, and what we put in these containers will influence them. It's interesting that the first two verses of Bereshit, chapter 1, when we read them from the Proto-Hebrew, they read a little different. It says that at the summit, Elohim fattened the heavens and the earth. Elohim fattened. So we have this, he fed. That was his beginning intention, was to feed the heavens and the earth. And then in the second verse it says that the heavens and the earth were empty. So he had to put stuff into it. And that's the idea that it gives in that first verse of Bereshit according to the Proto-Hebrew. So if we consider also from Bereshit 2:7 that we're a clay vessel that needs to be filled, then this is going to mean a lot to us as to what we fill that vessel with. So, where were we? Okay. Do what? Oh yes, we're on the next page. Okay, so let's consider verse 11. And see among the captives a woman of goodly form, and you have a desire towards her and would like to take her yourself to wife. So now it's not only a matter of when you take captives, but if you happen to see a good-looking woman amongst the captives and you want to take her home to be your wife, we're going to make a provision for that too. Even though my commandment said, kill everything. But now we're making a provision for this. So right or wrong, we get sucked into a belief based first and foremost on how our physical senses react. We can consider this in the phrase, and see among the captives a woman of goodly form. The word for woman is ishet, that finds its roots in isha, that from our previous studies we consider to represent the spiritual side of the Adam, ish being the physical side of worship. So this is kind of giving us an idea that we're going to bring in something spiritual into our house that we might not want that to be there as we move on. The word used for see is veraita, that from the roots ra'ah means to perceive, consider, observe, and discern. The word for among the captives is bashiveya, that from the root shibya means captive as well as to be in exile, and it finds its root in the word shebi, that means to take away. So it's here that we must pay attention. Is it in any way diminishing the truth found in the word of Yahuwah? Now, we could ask right off the bat, Elohim gave a commandment. Is this commandment in any way diminishing from that original commandment? Well, it will take away from that commandment if we allow it to. But he gave us this additional commentary, so to speak, because he understood that we're going to do it anyway, so I'm going to tell you how to do it and not get into a whole lot of trouble when you do it, hopefully. So here is where the idea of ra'ah, to perceive, consider, observe, and discern, must seriously come into play. This must happen before you have a desire towards her. So in other words, we see something that looks good spiritually, but we have to be able to perceive it, discern it, understand it, before we decide to take it into our house. So it's an important concept there. Now the word used for you have a desire is vechashakta, from the root hashak, that means to become attached. So once we've become attached to something, right or wrong, it becomes a part of ish, or the physical side, or our worship side. We do something physically to maintain that thing that we become attached to. Thus we read, and would take her to yourself to wife. So the word for and would take is velakachta. Where did they come up with these words? Velakachta, that from its root lakach means not only to take, but to possess. We could also consider being possessed by, because that's also what it means. So let's consider that it isn't just wrong information concerning the Torah, but this includes the reactions that we have to the physical world around us that possess us. Anger, depression, anxiety, fear, etc. These are the reactions to circumstances that we face day to day. These are also spiritual manifestations that come out as Isha. So if you wonder why we need Yahusha, it isn't only to release us from the wage of sin. It's to redeem and deliver us from these demons that we allow to possess us because we fail to Shema and Shamar in our lives. So, according to the next verse, we're going to find this is exactly what we do. So let's consider the phrase, "Then you shall bring her home to your house." The verse begins with the word, "Vechaveta," that from the roots bo means not only to bring, but also enter in and to attack. Now the Hebrew contains the word el, which the English doesn't really clearly show. This word means about as well as into, against, according to, and in regards to. So this phrase should read, "Then you shall bring her into your home to your house." So not just bring her home to your house, but now you're bringing her into your home to your house. And if we recall what we discussed in the previous verse, we understand that we oftentimes take possession of wrong information or negative spiritual or psychological influences because our failure to Shema and Shamar. So considering this, consider too what it is then that you are bringing into your home. We have to consider what it is that we are bringing into our home. The word for home in this verse is toch, that literally means in the midst of. We are bringing into our midst a possession of wrong information and spiritual psychological influences. These don't only come into our home, but also against it. Now the word for house here in this verse is beitecha, that comes from the roots bait, that means house. It also means tabernacle, tent. So do we have a house that we walk around in on a regular basis? Well, it's this flesh and blood thing. It's the tabernacle that contains not only the spirit of Elohim, our spirit, as well as the little hard drive that's going to be booted off onto a flash drive in the end. It contains our soul that gets written into. So consider the difference between the words home and house, and this is just in English. On the outside, it's simply a structure, but the structure houses the home where life is found. And there's a lot of houses, but it isn't until someone starts living there and bringing their traditions and their love and all this other good stuff into it that it becomes a home. So here we can consider an idea that the house is our body and the activity on the outside, and our home is our very soul, the tablet that our spirit writes on according to whatever is influencing it. It is at this time that this spiritual manifestation that you have allowed into your home shall shave her head and pare her nails. So imagine that's going to change the way she looks. I'm not sure. Let's look at the phrase, shall shave her head. The word for this phrase is vigel lecha, and the root of this word is galach, that aside from to shave also means destruction and waste. The word for her head is rosha, that also means authority. But there is a word in between these that the English ignores, and it's the object pointer that is the et, that represents the word of Yahuwah. So here we can formulate a question. What is in the midst that is destroyed and laid to waste by an inappropriate spirit that we allow into our home or into our house? There's a reason that Elohim said, when you go in, kill everything, so that you are not being tempted to do this. But here it says, well, you're not going to listen to me, so I'm going to give an amendment to this and say that when you take a captive. So now we've taken our captive in, and this captive just happens to go against the teachings of the Torah, and it starts to wear those down. So the very instruction of Yahweh Elohim comes under attack. Now let's consider the phrase, and pare her nails. The word for pare is vechaseta, that comes from the root asa, that also means to affect or to have effect, to govern, to hinder, and to bruise. The word for nails is ziparenecha, that from the root zippor means a little bird. The idea from the Proto-Hebrew is something that hops about. And the root is also safar, that means to jump or to skip about. So once again, there's no mention of the et that's between these two words that represents the word of Yahweh in English. It finds itself between the words for pear and for nails. So here, if we put that in, we can consider an idea of our perception of the word of Yahweh is being flighty and skipping from one point to another. We lose perception and the ability to discern. And we can also apply this to allowing a negative perception to influence our spiritual states, our moods, so that we're running around with no direction, bouncing from one thing to another. But what we find in the next verse will make us wonder why making teshuvah takes so long. So what is this causing? We're bringing this captive into our house. We're bringing it into this house, and now it's causing disruption on the inside. Because Elohim said, don't take captives, but because you're stubborn, I will allow and permit you to take captives, but you need to make sure that you perceive, discern, and understand what it is you're taking in, and then you need to be able to guard yourself and protect yourself against being overrun by it. So verse 13 says, and she shall put the garments of her captivity from off her, and she shall remain in your house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month. And after that you may go in unto her, and be her husband, and she will be your wife. So, bring her in. She's going to be crazy. She's going to wig out, freak out, and stress out. But give her a month, because she'll forget everything from her childhood and her parents, and she'll forget all of her things about her home. And then you can get frisky and make her your wife. So, what does that mean? Let's look at the phrase, and she shall put the garments of her captivity from off her. The word for and she shall put is vehisera, from the root sur, that means to turn away from, to abolish, and to avoid. The next word is again something we don't see in the English. It's the et that we've considered represents the word of Yahweh. It's pointing to the word simlat, that aside from garments also means the covering or a mantle. So an idea that we can formulate here is that the mantle or covering of the word of Yahweh is avoided and begins to be abolished in one's life. These are the garments of her captivity. Now this verse in Hebrew literally says, and she shall put the garments and her captives from off of her. So not the garments of her captivity. She will put the garments and her captives off of her. So let's take a look at this. In this, we have to consider that when we bring in an inappropriate spiritual influence into our lives, and that can be anything. You know, it doesn't always have to be about the Torah. We can bring in stuff from the media We can bring in stuff that, we got from Bobby Joe down at the gas station. It's going to affect us somehow, some way. So, but let's consider what happens when we bring an inappropriate spiritual influence into our lives. It doesn't come alone. It brings baggage. The word for captives, again, is Shiva, that means both captives and captivity as well as exile. This word is followed by the word me'aleh from its root al, that means into and towards. So if we add this to our initial idea, it would allow us to consider the following idea. The mantle or the covering of the word of Yahweh is avoided and begins to be abolished in one's life, leading us into or towards captivity or exile. Now we start a separation from this relationship. Remember, it used the word Elohecha. This is a personal one-on-one relationship. It is affecting our body, our soul, and our personal relationship with Elohim. So, when the spiritual influence that is counter to the word of Yahweh, that we are captured by it and in a sense exiled or separated from Yahweh. If this concept holds true, then we can understand why we no longer care what the Bible says when it comes to doing some of the things that we do. And that's something I think that we're all maybe a little guilty of from time to time. It says to do this, but I have this beautiful Isha that I took into my house. It's holding me captive, and it makes me avoid certain parts of the Torah. And anyway, we'll leave it at that. This spiritual influence will then remain in your house. So let's look at the phrase now, bewail her father and her mother a full month. The word for bewail is uvachekta, that from its root, baka, means to weep, but also suggests the concepts of depression, anxiety, anger, grief, and low self-esteem. So before we continue, let's consider the idea of misusing Scripture, because we have received information that, even though it sounds good and right, is still contrary to what the word of Yahweh means to say. We can consider this in the phrase, her father and her mother. The phrase begins with the et, which would give us an idea of this bewailing being done through the word towards the father and the mother. So, can we use scriptures to justify things that are not right? Yes, we can. We can twist them little suckers around to say anything we want them to say and justify anything that we do. So, now, the word for father in this verse is avicha, and the word for mother is ima. The word avicha, that means father, also means the strength of the house, and the word ima also means to divide. These words are separated by the word ve'et, which also illustrates the aleph and the tav, the word of Yahweh in human terms. So what we can consider here is that when we allow an inappropriate spiritual influence into our house, it causes us to avoid the covering of the word as we formulate ideas based on this false information. This in turn affects the strength of our house and our home, our body and our soul, causing depression, anxiety, anger, grief, and low self-esteem that in turn causes illness. So we bring a captive in. Elohim said in the beginning, he said, don't bring any captives in. Don't take captives. But now he said, take captives. But pay attention to what they do. Guard yourself. And then we don't guard ourselves. And we get all discombobulated on the inside, need therapy. And we get sick. And if I'd have known this 10 years ago, a lot of things would have been different in my life. So, now, the word, okay, well, let's go on. Let's move on to the next phrase that says, a full month. The word for month is yerach, that means a lunar cycle. Now, the Proto-Hebrew of this illustrates an idea of authority inside and outside the wall. The word for full is yamim, that literally means days, but this word can also refer to a lifetime as well as today.